Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Einstein. Thank you all for joining me tonight. And I will say I appreciate the patience over the last couple of weeks, and well, actually, the last couple of months. It's been a very eventful time of year for me, and I am grateful to be back sitting down. We've made some changes, obviously. The desk has moved. The office has been rearranged. Everything's good. I enjoying the change. Hopefully, y'all do too. And I get a little bit better engagement with the camera and everything else like that. So let me know what you think. I appreciate it. But I am glad to be back and recording this chapter review. So the last episode you got from me was for chapter 8, which was titled The Business of Getting New Bearings. And the book we're reading right now, by the way, is I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen, right there. Fantastic book, written by someone that actually sobered up in the Oxford group and changed his life there as well. And what we're going to be talking about is starting to live in accordance with a new way of life, right? And it's a great chapter about actually exploring those changes and beginning to understand what that looks like to live differently. So, which I can personally relate to in a lot of ways. So, I'm extremely happy to be here, and I'm excited to get to it. So, let's go ahead and get started. This is the review of Chapter 8 from the book I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. Now, I'm going to be reading out of this one, which is The Believing in False Guides, I Was a Pagan. It's literally just a facsimile reprint of the other book I showed you. So it's the exact same, which I'm happy about. But, so the first thing I really want to point out here is the subtitle for this chapter is the word is orientation, right? And it's, I think it's a perfect selection for this because anyone that's gotten a new job, there's an orientation period, orienting yourself to a new direction, a new goal, a new aim, right? So there's going to be this period of transition from old to new, right? It's not going to be, boom, we know exactly what we're doing. We know exactly how it's going to look. It's going to be, holy cow, my perceptions have changed. My understandings have changed. My belief structure has changed. Now what do I do, right? Everything's different now. So this orientation period is what occurs. And I'm glad he addresses it in this book, because if it's not addressed, it's kind of people don't realize it's what happens in these situations. So important point. It was about orientation. So sorry, I've got my notes right here. I'm getting oriented to this new layout of how I'm doing this whole thing, so bear with me. So the orientation he's changing from, and the orientation he's changing to is really summed up in this line. I then found out that men aren't built at all. They are building, right? So it goes from this, when books don't stay open. It goes from this thought process of, on one hand, you are who you are. That's what you were born. How you were born, you have the personality you have the character defects you have the tendencies that you have, right? It's unchangeable. That is who you are, right? So this idea that I found out that men weren't built at all, meaning built and unchangeable, to men are building. So what that means is they're being created, actively being created. So everything that you have in your life is part of this process, right? Everything that you, every behavior that you have can be modified. Who you are, how you present, what you're going to be doing, all of that can be modified. And this is a revelation to VC Kitchen, and it was a revelation to me too. I really thought that I was just resigned to the life that I was leading. I really thought that where I was and what I had done had placed me in a position to lose some hope, really, to believe that that's just what was going to be my lot in life. I was going to drink every day. I was going to drug every day. I was going to do these things. I was going to act this way for the rest of my life. And like Kitchen found out, that's not the case at all, which I'm very, very excited for. So that understanding that people can change is the orientation, or the thing that needs some orientation. That's the two viewpoints that's the viewpoint that's changing for him. So we then go to this. He starts to expand on the idea of change, really, and how important it is to actually see that it is possible to change, right? So human nature, in short, can be changed, and changed very roundly, meaning all around. Everything can be changed about it, which is very true. And then he goes to say here, and I have seen that it is changed not by any human method, as I had formerly imagined, but through application of what to me proved a wholly new and unfamiliar power. So it is this understanding that he has now, that it's not up to him to change, in the sense of, I've got to figure this thing out. I've got to do all of this psychological changing. I've got to do all of this life changing. I've got to do all of these things that myself. And what's happened is he's actually found a new power through this God of his understanding, through this connection, through this fellowship of people, through these things that he didn't know was possible. So he went from being self-reliant and a belief that it was all going to be up to him, and that was the only way that this was going to work, to a belief that it was possible with help. So that's pretty big, right? So it's not through self. It's through this power that he found connection to, which is really, really amazing to me. And it kind of leads into this part on 109, where he's talking about it's not improving self and like focusing on you so much as a matter of getting you out of the way. And that concept to me was incredible. Well, let me read the quote first here before I put the book down. It is rather a matter of self-displacement, a putting of self out of the way so that God can step in to do the work. It is a matter of rebirth controlled by the Holy Spirit, a matter of the Spirit which has nothing whatever to do with eugenics, right? So he thought, we touched on it a little bit before, that eugenics was going to be part of it. Like, it's going to have to be these character traits that are literally bred out of existence, which is a little bit of a scary thought when you phrase it like that. But he thought that was the only way for the human race to improve at one point. And now he's realizing that's not the case at all. Everybody in an immediate moment can improve and change, right? Anybody in an immediate moment can begin to live differently and get rid of these limitations and these character defects that we've invested so much in. So that's pretty substantial in the change in perspective. So the next part of that, though, the self-displacement, though, it's not like, again, I said, it's not you fixing you. It is, it's not me fixing me. It's me stepping out of the way to allow this higher power, this God that I have so actively avoided for my whole life, this power greater than myself that I didn't want to actually acknowledge existed, in to do the work, right? So it's a stepping away from yourself. It's getting out of the way to let something bigger than you in. And this goes right along with all spiritual literature. I mean, anywhere, right? Any religious or denomination or practice has a similar understanding. Or if you look at the 12-step programs, right? It talks about removing these barriers to this connection to that higher power, right? So it's this same understanding that's been translated into 12-step programs and was a lot to do with self-help. In the beginning, I think a lot of self-help has turned into this self-obsession, like which I don't think is healthy. But the goal is to honestly get out of your own way. And that is something that was a revelation to VC Kitchen. It was a revelation for me. I thought I had to be this sufficient change or self-made change or self-implemented change, and it wasn't anything to do with that, right? It was about just allowing the change to happen to me and practicing living a different way, which seems simple enough, but I couldn't figure it out on my own. So the psychological chain doesn't work for me or others. Desires don't change, right? I couldn't force any of that to change, right? I had to trust this process that I was put through in spirituality. I had to trust what was actually going on. So it was a whole different thing. So he talks about how that he thought that a spiritual experience was reserved for the few too. And I related to that a lot because I thought I wasn't going to be a person that actually was going to be able to have that experience, was going to be chosen to have an experience like that. Turns out that's not the case. You know, it is something that's accessible to anybody that honestly seeks it. And what a beautiful thing that is to me. What a blessing that I didn't know I had available to me. To know that's something that's available to a guy like me or to anybody that just wants to change their life is pretty awesome in the truest sense of the word. He then goes into these things, these different parts of his life that the change started to take place. And he mentions a few different areas, right? So he first talks about desire, and this can be for anything, right? He was a person driven by desire, and that's person driven by a need to feel good. Those 5 P's that he talked about: the power, pleasure, applause, prestige, and prosperity. I think that was the other one. Excuse me, I'll have to go back and look it up. But he was driven by these 5 P's, which are very superficial, which are very materialistic, right? And those were all different forms of desire, things he wanted, things he strove for because he thought they would fulfill a certain aspect of his life, that he thought they would give him that sense of completion or that sense of fulfillment. And they never worked, right? He was driven by this, and it never satisfied. He was in a constant pursuit of this fulfillment of this hole in his soul, as they'll call it sometimes. And he couldn't get rid of it. And he talked about in the book, and something I very much related to, was when he felt a desire, he only had 2 choices. One, satisfy the desire, and succumb to is the term he used, or the other being to ignore it. And he said that no matter what he did, it was never satisfied. Like, if he succumbed to the desire and went and got drunk, had a drink, smoked tobacco, cheated on his wife, right? Went out, flirted, it was still there. It was only temporarily gone, and then it reemerged, right? The desire actually was just temporarily pushed away, right? And it's the same thing with ignoring it, and when you ignore it, it just grows anyway, right? So when it's actually this underlying tone of things, then suddenly it just grows in the darkness, right? And what he talks about is when he actually invited God in, when he actually invited this power greater than himself in, suddenly the solution wasn't to succumb to it or ignore it, right? That's that fighting that we have with ourselves. God's solution was to remove it, to take away the desire completely for that temptation. And he just was overjoyed with it, right? So I'm going to read a considerable paragraph here. So this is on page 112 if you have the book. I had actually started for a bottle in the pantry when God stopped me with my first real bit of guidance and told me that I could not serve him as long as I was a slave to gin. I then and there admitted my inability to quit on my own will and asked God to take charge of the matter. He did. I looked at the bottle and felt a distinct sensation of nausea. I was revolted at the very thought of a drink, and the desire for alcohol has never come back. God simply lifted that desire entirely out of my life, and I have found this freedom far more desirable than any satisfaction or repression of desire I have ever experienced. Now, that is a incredibly powerful thing. And I want to relate this back to when he joined the Oxford group, right? No one in the Oxford group ever told him he had to stop certain things. They never said, if we require this to actually be a part. And I remember reading a chapter previously too. He was more worried that when he actually became a part of it, what God would ask him to do, because he couldn't imagine a life without his selfish indulgences. But this is what they were talking about, this exact situation where you'll realize one day that this is a certain behavior or a certain type of thinking is actually getting in the way of you being of service to the God of your understanding and others. And then it'll be very clear that this thing needs to go. And that could be a lot of things, guys. That could be laziness, procrastination. That could be drinking. That could be substance use. That could be cigarettes. That could be swearing, right? This can stretch to any negative behavior that's having a negative impact on you and actually standing in the way of you being of service to other people. Now that's incredible to me, right? This person that couldn't stand or that couldn't stomach the idea of not drinking, suddenly in a moment when he was going to have a drink, in celebration no less, realized right then and there, and he frames it as God told him this. He got this understanding that God had placed into him that he couldn't continue to drink and be of service. And right then and there, the desire was lifted. He asked God for help with it, and God came in and removed the desire to drink. Now, if that's not an incredible testimony in just one paragraph, right, of the power that living a spiritual lifestyle can have, I don't know what else to tell you, you know? And he goes on to say, this also occurred for him with his thought process. And he goes into his impure thinking, right? Because it's not just the physical actions we take, it's the thoughts we have. Because if we're still having the thoughts of impure things, and we can be thinking about drinking, it could be thinking lustful thoughts sexually, it could be literally anything. If you still have those thoughts, if you still continue to entertain those things, you're not as far away from them as you think you are. I guarantee it. They're closer than you think. And he talks about how this removal of desire affected his lustful thoughts too. He will begin to know intuitively that we must stop certain things, is what he said. And that includes the way he thought about women. in other people, right? And he actually mentions something that's one of the four tenets of the Oxford group, four absolutes, I guess, is actually what they're called. And it's called, he talks about purity of thought. And one of the four absolutes is purity, absolute purity. And how that power greater than himself, that God actually, came into his life and helped with these lustful thoughts too, and helped with these desires that he was having there as well. So it's just incredible to see the power and see the testimony of that power in someone's life, especially 90 years ago or more. So he starts to talk about how he has the strength and the willingness to do these daily tasks without hesitation or complaint too, right? He starts to be happy to do certain things. These things he found monotonous or aggravating, or things that he just had no interest in actually completing. Suddenly, when he's got this release from selfish desire, when he's got this release to see everything as an impediment to his own happiness, he doesn't mind doing things. He actually enjoys doing things. I can't recall exactly what he talks about, I believe, but it was about work. It was about dragging myself out of getting up on time. Like he barely got out before 8 or 10. Now he's getting up at 6 every day, right? Because he's not this slothful person anymore. And he starts to realize with this new perspective and with this change of thought and this change of lifestyle that he had confused, really. Like, one of the things that I realized early on in my recovery was I had confused pleasure with fun, right? I thought drinking and drugging and all this other stuff that made me feel good was fun. And that's not it at all. And I went from having these random spurts of release from misery to finding joy and contentment all day. And he talks about that as well. He went from this miserable, depressed person that sought fun through pleasure only to just having a general disposition of contentment with life, and joy and happiness ensued in everything that he did. So it doesn't matter necessarily what you're doing. You can bring that positive emotion to those things every single day. And I think that's an important understanding for people to have and see, and to rectify that, to realize pleasure is not fun. You can have fun and then pleasure can come from it, right? But if the only way you have fun is to do something that induces a feeling of pleasure, then there's an issue. That's a problem. You're going to rob yourself the opportunity to find genuine joy and contentment with life, I would say. So he started to realize these changes in his thinking. He started to realize that, and that was my experience too. I started to have love for people instead of lust. I started to have peace instead of laziness, is one thing he talked about, and an unshakable peace at that, right? I never thought that was something I could have, was an unshakable peace. Was something that was so far out of my realm of possibility in my mind that I didn't even consider it. I don't think I even truly knew what peace was until even a few years into my recovery. But it was replaced. So he starts talking about how he switches from this old lifestyle to this new one. And he talks about not having this reactionary living anymore, where he was driven by emotion. And he talks more about this idea of how desire really affects us negatively, and how desire can really have a negative impact on our lives just in general. And it redirects us to a selfish way of living, right? So the delay of desire, and he talks about, again, how the delay of desire was as bad as indulging in it, right? One was just as bad as the other. We talked about that a little bit earlier. But so he just really wants to stress that he could not remove this desire. He got the desire, and then his only way was to either succumb to it or fight it. And his way was to fight it. And it blew his mind that God's way was to remove it. He didn't even necessarily realize that that was a possibility. And when we talk about this, when we get to this, it reminds me of, for those in a 12-step program, there's a promise in the 10th step in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, actually, that says we've ceased fighting anything and anyone, including alcohol. And that's what he's talking about here, right? Because if we're fighting something, it still has power over us. And I think that's a place a lot of people don't realize they're at. Right? If you still have the desire to drink and you're fighting it on a daily basis, I do believe that eventually you will lose. You have to help. You have to ask this power greater than yourself to actually remove that desire from you. Because if you're fighting things constantly, including yourself and your desires, you'll never win. You will always be in a state of combat even. Right? You'll never know peace because you're always fighting these desires and urges that you have. Why would you, if there was a way to not fight them and find true serenity, why wouldn't you take that? Because I can guarantee you it's available to you. And he talks about how his he was finally able to actually help people. You know, he finally was able to have these interactions where he was actually of service to other people. Earlier on in the book, we talked about how he was trying to write this book. He was trying to publish these articles, and he wasn't helping anybody. Wasn't because he couldn't even help himself, right? He had this delusional thinking that if he told people that they should do this, and here was a list of reasons that they would do it, but he couldn't even do that for himself, right? He couldn't put together that he didn't have the power to change himself. Why would they have the power to change themselves? Right. So, and how much he had failed at actually trying to help people. But then he talks about how because of this release from selfish desire and because of this new way of living and because of these understandings, he was finally able to actually help somebody. And the first person was his sister. And I think he talks about how she stated that yeah, right here. What has happened to you? She wrote, I feel something different in you. For the first time in your life, you seem to be helping. And it wasn't out of selfish desire. It wasn't just to make himself feel good. It was a genuine desire, a genuine instinct to be of service, right? To actually share his experience, to actually show up and model almost the impact this change in lifestyle can have for somebody. Now that is a powerful place to be, right? And let me read this next part because he surrendered his life to a God of his understanding, right? And I have this, 117. The surrender of my life to God did not mean retirement from life, right? Because a lot of us think, oh, if I let God run my life, I'm going to do nothing and want nothing and never feel good. That's how I thought, at least before it happened. So the surrender of my life to God did not mean retirement from life, but the surrender of my mind. And the surrender of my mind did not result in flabby mental muscles. It meant greater usefulness in all departments of life and developed a clarity, insight, and activity of mind which I had never before been gifted. Now, I can tell you those are the things I've always wanted. That clarity, insight, and activity of mind, right? And I fought and fought and fought to have, and fought and fought and fought to get, but I could never come to fruition. I could never actually manifest them in my life because of my own selfishness and my own self-centeredness and my own fears and insecurities, right? But when you actually make this surrender to that God of your understanding, when you actually go through and take the corresponding actions, suddenly you get these things. You get these wonderful blessings, these gifts of life. And when he shares about them, it's like the gifts of surrender were unlike anything he had ever experienced. And that was my exact experience. It talks about in the literature, we'll have a life beyond our wildest dreams. And when I say the literature, I mean of certain recovery programs. And what ends up happening is you just have these gifts and these blessings that you never thought were within reach are so much closer than you realized. They're actually already sitting within you. You just have to get out of the way for them to come to fruition. And it's not like anything you could have imagined for yourself. And that was my experience. And that's what his experience was too. He realized he was always missing something in his life. He always had this aspect that wasn't quite right with him. And he talks about his experience with God, of his understanding, that he feels that presence. And for Kitchen, it was this experience with Jesus. He said he felt the presence of Jesus Christ in his life at all times. And now I know that's not necessarily everyone's religious practice. It can be love, it could be forgiveness, it could be the source, power, the universe, nature, whatever religious deity you might practice with. He felt that presence in his life at all times. Now, that's a pretty incredible thing to be able to say, to be able to genuinely write down and say, this is true for me. Can you imagine how much hesitation he might have had for that? Well, maybe at this point it was just his truth and he was writing it down. He didn't question it at all. But if this had been the man that was writing at the beginning of the book that was completely run on selfish desire, he would have been so scared to write that. Isn't that that shift just absolutely is mind-boggling, right? It's dumbfounding to see this person that would never have admitted to anything even close to this suddenly is saying, yeah, I feel like my creator, my God is standing with me and is close to me at all times, that he feels that presence all day. This was a man that was miserable and hated everybody, including himself, and solely was out to serve himself. That's the person that's saying this. Now, how incredible is that? To me, that's a miracle right there, right? That is a miracle. So, he says, I believe he talks about how he begins to strive towards this ideal. And I talked about this when we read James Allen together. And we have to have an ideal that we're striving for. And this is best personified in an individual. And he talks about that same thing here. He strives to have more righteous and Christ-like character. He wants to be as close to Christ as he can possibly come in behavior and thinking. Right? We have to have something to hold up as a ruler to ourselves and say, where can I get better? Where can I improve? Right? Where can I move forward with? And it's not something to condemn ourselves with. It's something to grow through. It's something to actually have a belief about. It's something to actually say, I can achieve this, and have a belief and a realization that it's possible for you too. Because I never had that before. I just did what I thought it was right in the moment, and I didn't have a standard to actually go against. And I found myself in a world of trouble and hurt and pain. But if I hold myself to this standard, and that standard he held himself to was Jesus Christ and having a Christ-like character and righteousness, suddenly has a whole different way of thinking, a whole different way of living. And this is something that I believe in the 12-step programs is the heavy lifting portion, which is 10, 11, and 12, that is lived on a daily basis, that's practiced on a daily basis, to actually work through the circumstances that are presented to you in life so you can continue to improve and strive towards this ideal. And he talks about, I have this quote written down, I found for a certainty that character is caught, not taught, right? When I am around people or when I am learning from people by their example, I can change. A lot of people can wag a finger at me and do this whole, you should do this, you should do that. But I learn through it being modeled by somebody else. And that's another reason why he states that his ideal is Jesus Christ, is this Christ-like character. Because it was an actual modeled behavior. It was somebody that actually existed and somebody that he could strive to be like. As close as possible, at least. And I would stress that that's something you should look for. Who would you want to be like? Who do you want to actually model your behavior after? Right? Because I do believe that. Character is caught, not taught. You have to see people that are actually living this way. Put yourself around them. Learn about them. Believe that it's possible. A lot of that comes from seeing someone else do it. And as soon as he put himself around other people that had changed their behavior, he started to change his character. He started to pursue spiritual ideas. He started to have this different lifestyle, which was completely foreign to him previously. It's pretty incredible to see his transformation just in these last few chapters, I guess I should say. And through this conscious contact, right? I mentioned the 11th step, maybe, in 12-step programs, or just your practice of prayer and meditation if you're not in a part of a 12-step program. You'll always find that's where the power comes from to actually do the right things, to take these different actions to change the way you're living, right? He talks about he changed the behaviors from checking boxes, quote unquote, to doing the right thing for the right reason, right? I found myself having used to do this behavior that I would only do the right things because I felt like it was required of me to get what I wanted. I would do them for a certain payoff. I would do them for a certain selfish and self-centered reasoning. But he talks about how that changes. He talks about how doing the right thing for the right reason gives him so different of a life, right? He goes from somebody that's unreliable, right? And somebody that's just totally self-absorbed and driven for selfish reasons to somebody that can be relied upon because he's found a power that he can rely on. And he's found this way of life that you don't do the right thing because you reap rewards. You do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And if no one finds out about it and you get no positive reinforcement from it, that's okay. It's living a principled life instead of a emotional, desired fueled life. And that conscious contact with the God of his understanding was what gave him the strength to actually doing that. Be able to do that. And it's to be of service to God and others rather than of service to yourself. Now, I was always of service to myself. Always. I thought I was the most important person that I had to worry about, and no one else was going to care about me if I didn't care about me, right? So why wouldn't I just be out for me? But the longer I've stayed in recovery, the more I've practiced these spiritual things, I've suddenly come to realize that it's much more fulfilling and much more peaceful of a life to be of service to God and others. And my needs and my life will work itself out the way it's supposed to. That was a hard leap of blind faith for me in the beginning. But thank God it happened. Thank God I was able to actually follow through with that and be given the opportunity to do that. I started taking responsibility for my actions. And he talks about that in here as well. I started to actually pick an ideal I wanted to strive for. How did I actually want to be in this world? Did I want to be known as somebody that was completely selfish and self-centered, or did I want to actually genuinely help somebody? Did I actually want to be somebody other people wanted to be around? Because I wasn't that for a long time. I wasn't that type of guy for a long time. And I didn't realize it. I like to tell myself I was, or I'd try to manipulate other people to keep them around me, to make them like me. But it was so hollow and so painful. So finding this power and reorienting yourself to this new power, right? Getting new bearings on how to live and what it, because your behaviors start changing, what you look for start changing, your motivation starts changing, right? You start using this power to help and do good. And thank God for that. So there's a couple things I want to read right here at the end. And again, this is the Oxford group, so we're going to talk a little. He mentions here towards the end of the chapter those absolutes I talked about earlier, and he's going to mention them again right here. And it's 4 of them. He knows that I will try to use the power as Christ would use it, and in fact, as Christ is directing me to use it. Honestly, unselfishly, and in a pure and loving way. Now, the 4 absolutes are honesty, unselfishness, love, and purity. And when you use this power that you've found through this connection to a God of your understanding, through this energy, this source, this whatever it might be for you, when you use it for anything that falls under those 4 absolutes, you'll continue to find power to execute on that. You'll continue to find power to follow through on these things. He also says this: God's orders to his followers are never simply right or left inclined. They are halt, turn around, and forward march. I smile so much at that, because what that means is, because if you put those 2 next to each other, the 4 absolutes, and then saying, hey, quit going the direction you're going, you're going completely the wrong way, turn around and march back towards me. He's saying, if your actions aren't fueled or align with absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute purity, and absolute love, you're doing it wrong. You're walking away from the God of your understanding. You're walking away from source, from creation. You're walking away into a selfish and self-centered life. And some days, it's still hard for me to believe, but I agree with that entirely. Because when I find myself doing anything that doesn't fall into the category of those 4 absolutes, meaning there's some selfishness involved, I'm walking towards a painful part of my life. if I don't rectify it as soon as possible. So abiding by those four absolutes and incorporating those into my spiritual practice, like when in my thoughts, my words, and my deeds, life will change. Life has changed for me. And I believe it'll change for you too. So, well, that's it for the Chapter 8 review. I feel like this one was a little rocky in the beginning, and I think it's because it's just been so much time in between and the new orientation to the new setup here. But I hope y'all bear with me on this one. It was a lovely chapter. It was filled with direction, and that is something that's so needed. It's something I needed quite a bit of. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all follow along and give this chapter a read. It's really fantastic. I think you'll find some good information in it and direction in it for yourself as well, if you're willing to do that. So next week I will jump on and we will do the reading for the next chapter, which is the business of living the other way around, redirection, which is perfect connector from that last line I just read. The last quote I read to you, by the way, was the last line of that chapter. So turning yourself around, whole different thing. So, but thank you all so much. And I look forward to next week. So until next time, thanks.